If you think talking about mental illness is scary, imagine what happens when we don't talk about it. Join the conversation. Visit letstalkstigma.org.
Hello, I'm Karl Shallowhorn, board member for the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition. And on behalf of the coalition, I would like to welcome you to our Facebook Live event focusing on stigma and obsessive compulsive disorder, from stereotypes to support. There are many misconceptions about this condition. So in the next hour, we're going to take the opportunity to raise awareness about this condition and how it can affect some people. According to the International OCD Foundation, obsessive compulsive disorder is a common and often chronic and debilitating disorder. Up to 240 million people in the world suffer from OCD at some point in their lives. Fortunately, effective, evidence-based treatments are available to help diminish OCD symptoms, greatly reduce suffering, and potentially achieve full relief. People with OCD can thrive if they receive timely and appropriate treatment. However, access remains elusive for many. Research validates what is already known anecdotally. Only a tiny fraction of individuals living with OCD ever receive an accurate diagnosis and effective treatment. The needless suffering of millions of people continues because of a lack of both awareness about OCD and clinicians adequately trained to diagnose and treat it properly. Stigma, shame, lack of health insurance coverage, and high costs are also significant barriers to care. In today's discussion, we're going to explore this topic and hear from two individuals who have firsthand experience with understanding this disorder. First of all, we'd like to thank Horizon Health Services for the sponsorship of this event. Before I introduce our panelists, here are a couple of housekeeping rules. Our program is for 1 hour. During this time, if you have a question or comment, please type into the comment section and we will respond accordingly. Today, I'm joined first by Jennifer Liberatore. Jennifer is a graduate of the University of Buffalo and is a certified Pilates instructor, yoga teacher, and Reiki master. She co-founded the Zach Liberatore Foundation after losing her son Zach in 2020 after he suffered with debilitating OCD for 8 years. Their foundation has donated over $500,000 to Oshai's Children's Hospital's mental health clinic and OCD program. Jennifer is also the author of the book, You Wonderful Boy, which tells Zach's story. We're also joined by Auggi May. Auggi May is a mental health counselor who has been working with Horizon Health Services for nearly 5 years. In their work, they primarily work with queer and neurodivergent individuals. They assess and provide treatment for clients with OCD and OCD-related diagnoses, excessive rumination, unhelpful avoidance, and unworkable rule-governed behaviors on an adjunct level. They primarily use ERP, which is exposure and responsive prevention therapy, and ACT, which is assistance and commitment therapy with her clients. When they're not at work, Auggi typically can be found hanging out with their 2 basset hounds, Molly and Billy, and their cat, Marrow. So welcome, Jennifer and Auggi.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just start off with a question for both of you. How would you define obsessive compulsive disorder? And Jennifer, I'd like to go with that question first. How would you define the condition?
Sure. Well, Auggi is obviously the mental health professional here, but OCD is a mental health disorder characterized by cycles of obsessions, which are unwanted recurrent thoughts, and compulsions, which is repetitive behaviors or rituals. It can be obviously affect everyday life, but it goes much deeper than that. It can be, debilitating and often linked with suicidal thoughts.
Excellent. Auggi?
Yeah, just to add, the DSM also obviously has like its own definition and diagnostic criteria, but I do believe that sometimes leaves out like certain aspects of OCD. Like there's pure OCD, which is more where all of this process of obsession and compulsion happens internally with our thoughts. And so I kind of said this in my bio, but one of the ways I like to describe it to people is when we learn to respond to anxiety by creating rules around them. So the rules are like the compulsive behaviors that we do in response. And when those rules don't make things better, but actually tend to make things worse or be unworkable. So a good example is when I lock up for the night, I lock my door once, and that probably helps my anxiety and it's workable. But if I lock my door 8 times, well, now it can be debilitating, right? Or if I have to keep locking it, and the more I keep locking it, the more I'll have to keep locking it. So that's sort of like the way that I like to describe it, is around like how we respond to those obsessions and the anxiety that they bring to try to control it.
Those are both great definitions and explanations of the condition. So real quickly, and this is something that I just thought about offhand, just popped in my head. I'm sure you both know who Howie Mandel is, the actor and I guess you could call him a comedian. He often talks about living with OCD, and he's become an advocate for OCD. How do you feel about people like him stepping into the spotlight and bringing awareness and talking about their own condition? Obviously it helps, but in what kind of way do you think it helps? Jennifer, I want to ask you that question first.
For me, just coming from the standpoint of, a mom with my son who suffered with OCD, I mean, I think it's great because I just know my Zach's biggest, concern was that people didn't really know what OCD really is. And I think he just bringing awareness to it. He's obviously, has a huge platform and is bringing awareness to it.
Yeah. I wasn't familiar actually that he had it. So I think that the more people are able to talk about their experience with OCD in general, the better. And especially if they have a platform, OCD can look like so many things, that I think that the more, word is escaping my mind, visible examples of people living with OCD, the more people can maybe start to understand what their own experience is, or even like be prompted to go get treatment or talk to someone about it.
Excellent. So Auggi, what got you interested in working with individuals with OCD?
So I actually was diagnosed with OCD when I was younger. And it is something that not only I have, but my 2 older brothers also have their own like repertoires with varying degrees of effect on their life. And so when I went into my field, it was one of the things that I really wanted to be able to help other people who are experiencing it, help people kind of understand that experience more, and just be able to also like accurately see and diagnose it, because I think that it's something that even sometimes clinicians, because of the way that it is so often depicted in one very specific way, can miss. And when we talk about OCD, there are very effective treatments specifically designed for it that if it is not accurately identified and worked with those individuals, they can really be missing out on that kind of treatment that can really help improve and bring like more freedom back into their life, and even just understanding about like what's happening. Something like traditional CBT, for example, isn't always the most helpful thing for someone with OCD. And that's going to be almost the first line that you'll be getting in most therapies. So if someone with OCD goes in and it's not identified, they could end up with even exacerbated symptoms sometimes.
So what kind of specialized, did you take any specialized coursework or?
Yeah. So I'm trained in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a specific kind of therapy which deals better targets, I would say, like some more of the like thought spiral, like obsessional thoughts. It deals a lot with words and kind of that OCD that's really like, I have the thought, I respond to the thought, I have this thought, I respond to this thought, and I go all the way down, right? So ACT is very helpful with that, and also gets you kind of back into living your life in the world and not inside your head with it. And then exposure response prevention, which is really kind of like the gold standard for OCD treatment, which is really kind of with rule governed behaviors, with these obsessions, which we're trying to control the anxiety that comes from them with these compulsions. We sort of lose track of the direct contingency, which is like what actually would happen if we did the thing we're afraid of or didn't do the compulsion, which is oftentimes the thing we're afraid of. So exposure response prevention basically says like, well, let's test it, right? And, you know, with willing participation, we tested and we recognized, oh, a lot of times, wait, that anxiety isn't the level I thought it would be. And then a lot of times once we break that illusion, that specific theme obsession that's happening in that moment, because OCD goes through themes, kind of loses a lot of power. And we can find a little bit more freedom to maybe not respond to that thought in this moment with the compulsion, or even just give it a little bit of space before we do.
So with the clients, the patients that you work with, is there any kind of efficacy rate or like statistic in terms of how effective you found to be?
So I wouldn't want to misspeak with like specific percentages, because I don't have those off the top of my head.
Sure.
Which is maybe bad on me for not.
Maybe more anecdotal than I'm guessing.
Yeah. But I know that the sort of gold line standard for OCD treatment is exposure response prevention, because it sort of directly allows us to expose ourselves to that and recognize that the fear wasn't the same as we maybe imagined it would be, or our avoidance had built it up to be, without some of the harmful secondary compulsions that can build on when we do something like CBT, where we're responding to the thought with a reframe, which sometimes with OCD then becomes that cycle that goes all the way down.
That's pretty fascinating. I wasn't even aware of that. So, Jennifer, I want to ask you, as you mentioned in your bio, you wrote your book, You Wonderful Boy, which is about your son, Zach, and who lived with OCD. Tell us more about Zach and his story and why you wanted to share it.
Yeah. Well, Zach was truly a wonderful boy. I always say he was an exceptional human. He was the oldest of my 4 sons. He was a compassionate and kind and empathetic person. And he was maybe in middle school when he started with some anxiety. He started seeing a mental health counselor. But around the age of 16, he told us that he thought he had OCD. Didn't disclose really the full extent of what was going on. So the mental health counselor really wasn't able to help him. She didn't specialize in OCD, and it wasn't her fault because he did not disclose. We found out exactly what was going on. He was put on a low dose of Zoloft. So around 6 months later, he disclosed nothing was helping and that he had suicidal thoughts frequently. So we encouraged him to disclose what was really going on. He actually wrote pages and pages of obsessions and compulsions that he dealt with every single day. It was, as parents, it was terrible, obviously. He went to ECMC's inpatient facility for 2 weeks just to keep him safe. This is obviously terrifying for a parent, but he was then hooked. We were hooked up with a psychologist at Children's Hospital who, specialized in OCD. And he greatly helped Zach over the years. He helped him manage. I believe that that Zach didn't get the treatment soon enough. I've heard some psychologists say that OCD is highly treatable, especially if they're getting the correct treatment. As Auggi said, like sometimes a treatment isn't the correct treatment, coupled sometimes with the correct medication. So it was a full year before he got to the right place and the right treatment. And I will always believe that didn't help him. So for me, and we're talking 14 years ago, things were very different, at that time. To find a psychologist who specialized in OCD was a 6-month wait. There weren't the resources, I think, that are, available today. So Zach, he managed it for 8 years, though he suffered, and um, a lot of other disorders became present. He also had an eating disorder. He struggled with depression. He eventually turned to a painkiller, an opioid, called which took his life in 2020. But I always say that Zach is the bravest human I've ever known because he never gave up. He went to 5 inpatient and 5 outpatient facilities all over the country for everything from OCD to the eating disorder to addiction. He never gave up hope. And I also say that he was brave because Zach was always posting on social media about everything he went through. And that was, what he was most passionate about was breaking the stigma of OCD and mental illness. And, he was a quarterback for Canisius High School football team. He had a lot of friends. Like nobody knew what was going on, behind the, what it looked to be. So when he spoke out, he really affected people and helped a lot of people. And that was incredibly brave to do. So one of the reasons I wrote my book was to continue to do what he did, to just bring awareness to OCD and, breaking that stigma. And just to, tell his story. There's a lot of people out there who suffer like he did, and a lot of families who go through what we went through. So I just feel like it's helpful for everyone, even if they don't know what OCD is. And that was his pet peeve, was people saying my OCD, because they were very clean or neat, or they, like Auggie said, would just, turn on the light switch a couple of times. He wrote an essay many years ago, which countless people have told me how it's helped them to understand what OCD really is. He wrote an essay just talking about everything that he went through. And so I felt that it was important to share that in my book, and it's also on our website. So yeah, I just wanted to tell his story and to continue his, legacy of helping people.
He really does sound like quite an extraordinary young man. He really does.
He was.
So I'll have a question for you. This is from the audience. So reminder, audience, if you have a question, just type in the comment box and we'll try to get to it. So this question, Auggie, is, can you speak about how OCD and ADHD differ and how parents can help young children get the correct diagnosis?
So I will say that I am not, my qualification in diagnosis does not extend to diagnosis of ADHD because of how that is classified. But I do know a lot about ADHD, and I work with a lot of ADHD adults. And so these are not diagnoses that exist solely in separation, right? So you could have just one, you could have just the other, and you can also have both. And it is not uncommon for people who have ADHD to develop rules to help them manage that can sometimes sort of become a train on a track that runs off, right? I think the most common symptomology confusion, and it's not actually specific to ADHD necessarily, but sometimes sensory stimulatory behaviors that are repetitive, like stereotypical, stereotypical, I just use that word, behaviors that can be used for like sensory regulation and like sensory soothing with individuals with ADHD or autism, can also be very similar to behaviors that you would see that are compulsive with OCD. So things like skin picking, body focused compulsions, biting hand, trichotillomania, like pulling hair, those can occur in both conditions. And so, I mean, really, if you are seeing repetitive behavior that seems to be in response to anxiety, might be the biggest tip off. But it's hard because stereotypical behavior with autism or ADHD is also a response to anxiety because it's sensory soothing. I would say that like ADHD is diagnosed by like a neuropsychologist, right? And so at the end of the day, like the official correct diagnosis would be done through that route. But also, I would say that these two conditions often do co-occur just because of kind of the places where ADHD can really impact us and the ways that we can manage that to like live in the world sometimes requires us to build up a lot of rules, and then it can become something where those rules become unworkable, and that's where we might start to see an OCD repertoire at least develop.
So they ultimately feed off each other at the end of the day, you're saying?
They can, right? So they are not uncommon to co-occur.
Right.
But at the end of the day, talk to a neuropsych, or there are at Horizon actually are practitioners here, like the medication providers. We have some that have recently been trained in adult diagnosis for ADHD, like late diagnosis. And so Horizon might be a good resource for people who are trying to find the difference between those two presentations.
Awesome. That's a wonderful, deep and detailed question or answer to that question we had. Thank you so much, Auggi. So Jennifer, I want to ask you, as a parent, what are some signs to look for if the child keeps their behavior to themselves? You said you saw things in Zach. At first, was he more secretive about it, or was he pretty much out in the open? Can you tell us more about that? I know you said a little bit before, but like, what would you say are things to look for?
I mean, just from my experience, Zach showed little idiosyncrasies, growing up. I never thought anything about it because they were kind of things that I did myself. He liked things lined up sometimes and things like that. He never appeared or said anything about struggling with any kind of thoughts or anxiety. He definitely had an onset of OCD at 16. And as I said, when he first, kind of thought he had it himself, he kind of looked it up himself. He was very private and secretive about it for quite a long time. He was embarrassed and ashamed and didn't know anything about it. There wasn't a lot for us to see as far as, things to look for. He wasn't really showing anything unusual. Maybe a little bit more time. A lot of his was time spent in the bathroom. Like he would do like a lot of rituals in the bathroom, a lot of showers. But that wasn't anything, like it wasn't completely out of nowhere. I'm sure there are, other signs that, Auggi can talk about, but for us, unfortunately, there just wasn't a lot to see there until he really disclosed everything.
Okay. That's interesting that you say that. I have another question from the audience. So if you do have a question, just type in the comment box. Like I said before, if you're just tuning in, I'm Karl Shallowhorn from the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition. And I'm joined by Jennifer Liberatore, co-founder of the Zach Liberatore Foundation and author of the book, You Wonderful Boy, and also Auggi May, mental health counselor from Horizon Health Services. And Horizon is the sponsor of today's event. Another question from our audience for Auggi. Do you find that with OCD, it's often thrown around as a term like, I'm so OCD, without treating it as a serious diagnosis? Does that lead to the stigma of it?
Yeah. It definitely gets thrown around a lot like that. And it definitely does add to the stigma. And I think it adds to the stigma in two ways, because it perpetuates that OCD kind of looks like one thing. Like typically when somebody says that, they're talking about maybe they have, to keep their desk clean or something, or maybe they need their books in a certain order, which could be something that someone with OCD might have an obsession and compulsion around. But OCD is really defined a lot by the distress that's caused by these things and the unworkability of them. And so if somebody is like, oh, you put that back in the wrong spot, I have to put it here, I'm sorry, I'm so OCD, that really minimize that experience when maybe somebody else would have to take every book off the shelf and put them all back, right? And I think it also does a disservice because it really shadows over the other presentations of OCD that can look like a lot of things, but there are common themes that do like reoccur across different people with OCD, because OCD typically tries to attack the things that are the most personal to us. And so if somebody has OCD that's harm OCD, for example, harm OCD is the fear that you might harm someone. And so the response to that is oftentimes to pull away from a person, right? So let's say a dad can't hug his child because he's afraid that he will squeeze them too hard and something bad will happen to them, right? Well, that is something that's very difficult to talk about because it's a thought that he's having that's intrusive. Like it's the opposite of what he wants. It's his biggest fear, but it's showing up in his head as a thought. And that's already going to be something that's so hard to talk about. But then if your understanding of OCD is it means that you need to put the book back a specific way and nothing else, because that's all that it's portrayed as or talked about, then you're going to feel pretty isolated and have a lot of difficulty talking about how your OCD looks like a fear, a thought that says, I'm going to squeeze my kid too hard, that makes you not be able to touch to hold your child.
And that's very distressing and debilitating, like we said before, especially in other types of situations, for sure. Another question from the audience. This one is for Jennifer. Jennifer, can you please speak about the differences or the difference between how the public perceives OCD and how serious a condition it can truly be?
I think we were a good demonstration of that. Just as we were just saying that, at least in the past, OCD is portrayed as having these clean and neat tendencies. You know, I fortunately, I think obviously all of this is changing, like we said with Howie Mandel and a lot of people talking about it. But yeah, especially back when Zach was really suffering, you know, Zach wasn't even neat or clean. His bedroom was a mess. You know, he didn't have any of those classic things that people think OCD is, or yeah, and what it really is, what it really was for him, was unable to get through a day, was unable to keep his friendships because he couldn't hang out with his friends, when he couldn't go to school or be in school and, you know, keep up the A student, you know, Zach that he was, because he could only use certain numbers when he did work. And when he was writing, he had to rewrite things over and over and over until it was perfect, and then it wasn't perfect. And so he'd miss a whole task because of doing that. He couldn't, you know, keep relationship, you know, with his girlfriend. It came to a point where he barely left his bedroom. You know, he would be in his bedroom or the shower, you know, back and forth all day long. So that's a huge discrepancy between, you know, someone being neat and clean than, you know, the debilitating factor of what this, you know, kind of severe OCD can really be for so many people.
Yeah, and like I said, even in the intro, there's so many misconceptions about this condition, and I'm glad we're really shedding a lot of light on what it really is versus what maybe some of those misconceptions may be. So thank you for that answer, Jennifer. I want to go back to you. Actually, first of all, I want to remind our viewers that you can visit our website at letstalkstigma.org to take the pledge on stigma. Also, if you're connected with a business, organization, or faith community, you can become an organizational member of the coalition. You can find information for this on the website under the members tab. So, Auggi, and I kind of alluded to this a little before, but how does OCD look different than someone might imagine, given how the media portrays it? Because, of course, the media has a lot of ways that all kinds of mental health conditions, it'll portray it one way, but the reality is something different. We've kind of talked about it a little bit already, but can you go more into that for us?
Yeah. So obviously kind of the example of cleanliness, right? Where I think the media focuses a lot on like that specific like repertoire or common theme that occurs with OCD. And it can show up for people, but OCD goes through like these periods of themes where a lot of times they can also shift. So somebody might have this focus on cleaning, but that might not even always be the thing that's causing like the most distress or where they're putting the most of their thought, depending on what's going on with their life. And it definitely goes beyond that. So there's one of the assessments used to diagnose OCD is called the Y box. It's the Yale Brown. I always call it the Y box. So I believe it's like obsessive compulsive assessment. Don't quote me on that though, but like YBOCS. And it has categories. And so these categories are common themes. And the themes, you'll kind of notice that they all relate to things that could be catastrophic. And some of them relate to things feeling just right as well. And so things like harm OCD, which I spoke of previously, could be a fear I'm going to harm myself. It could be a fear I'm going to harm others. It can show up as sexual obsessions where we doubt our own sexuality in whatever direction. There's a lot of moral OCD that can show up where it becomes very debilitating to make any kind of moral decision because we can kind of go round and round. And like I said, not all of these even look like overt thought, obsession, and then external compulsions. You can have pure OCD, which is something that occurs within our head, or social OCD, where we have compulsions in our head that make it hard for us to socialize with other people because of how we're sort of analyzing things going back and forth, and other external compulsions too. Instead of being overly clean, you can have OCD people who will collect and hoard things. And you can also have the opposite, where people will purge things in a way that becomes really unworkable because then you have to rebuy it. Or even something like confession OCD, where you can't kind of keep anything to yourself because you have this compulsion to confess, which might be linked back to morality or something else. But it can really look like a lot else, and a lot of things that are pretty difficult to talk about for people too, because it does latch to things that are sort of opposite to who we are as people. Our biggest fears, that we might hurt someone, that we might hurt ourselves, that we might cause harm. And those kind of things are ones that would be a lot very difficult to talk about, to bring up in therapy, let alone if you didn't really have an understanding that OCD could look like that, which I don't think the media, I have never seen a portrayal of harm OCD in the media that I recognized. If I have seen one, I'm sure it probably wasn't good. But I can't recall any that I've seen.
Thank you for that. Jennifer, can you tell us more about the work of your foundation? And you've been so successful in raising funds. I mean, you raised well over $500,000 for Oshai Children's Hospital and for the mental health clinic and OCD program. Tell us more about the foundation.
Well, after Zach died, we wanted to create a foundation. We didn't really know in what capacity. We had no idea what we were doing. We knew we wanted it to focus on OCD, on both bringing awareness and funds. And to make a very long story short, we were linked with someone from Oshai Children's Hospital, which is now Golisano Children's Hospital. I just keep forgetting to say that, but
I do too. Sorry.
No. It's going to take me a while. but they had started an outpatient clinic for OCD, you know, and it kind of fell to the wayside to the back burner in 2020 because of lack of funding. So we kind of came in, it was like the perfect storm. They needed money to get that clinic going. So that was our goal. We have an incredible committee of ladies who just help us every year with our fundraiser. It's called Zachtoberfest. It's every fall. And our first year, we had 800 people show up, and we made like almost $100,000. It was unbelievable. We were overwhelmed, obviously. I think in the beginning, you know, a lot of people loved Zach, and a lot of people knew our family. Our community really showed up, you know, for that. But unbelievably, every year we continue to get this big showing of people and support financially. We've raised around 100,000 every year. And I think that is because it's not just the people who know us or the community, you know, he grew up in, but just getting his story out there, you know, particularly about OCD and, you know, and then he struggled with addiction. And I think it was just kind of time in Western New York for this to get out there and people see also what the hospital has done with their funds, which also helps it to continue, I think. They've done a lot of things, but the main thing is they got the outpatient clinic up and running. And that's also an eating disorder clinic, so OCD and eating disorder. And that didn't exist in Western New York, you know, when Zach could have used it. So not just seeing a psychologist or a mental health counselor, but it's kind of a 3-day week program, I believe. And then a couple of years ago, they also asked if we would fund a postdoctoral fellowship for a psychologist to, you know, concentrate on pediatric OCD. And they work in that clinic. So they're now on the second person to go through that program. And we actually have got to meet a girl named Anna who had that particular psychologist, you know, the one that we provided the fellowship for, and she's doing amazing, and she spoke at our fundraiser. So it was really a full circle kind of moment. We're just, I don't even know how to say, we're so grateful, you know, for the support of our community to just to be able to honor Zach and in his name do anything to help bring awareness to OCD and bring, you know, funds to help the families, you know, and patients, kids who struggle the way he did.
That is such an incredible legacy. Thank you for sharing that, Jennifer. Auggi, is there a typical age when OCD begins, or, you know, they call age of onset, or when it, you know, begins to occur?
I know that there is different diagnostic criteria there are with like a lot of things for childhood OCD as opposed to like adult onset, but there's no like specific age. One of the things which Jennifer referenced this earlier is that there are really high rates of like minimal or no occurrence in adulthood if someone receives treatment early enough when they have like childhood like OCDs or signs of childhood OCD, because they're kind of, when they're receiving the right treatment at that age, they don't have as many of these, I like to call them like house of cards built up yet. Like we don't have as much, they haven't had as much time to build up all these repertoires. And so it can be easier to learn the skills. And then once you really have those skills and they can generalize, then it becomes a lot easier to manage those kind of obsessional like thoughts as you move into adulthood. And so you're going to, or you often will develop less compulsions than as things go along, which is why, like, if you do have some concerns that your child might be presenting with OCD, I want to say, like, with childhood OCD, like the age 10 is one that is in my head, but I don't want to speak too intently on that because I haven't looked specifically at those numbers in a while. But I think that for childhood OCD, I want to say like 10 is a pretty common age for those symptoms for children. But really, if you're seeing those kind of patterns, or if you have that curiosity, you see your child struggling in general, like I think that it is hopefully as stigma breaks down around this, it will also help to have more people taking their kids in and getting assessed so that they can receive appropriate treatment, which could really help save them a lot of distress from it later in life.
Yeah, so like we were saying before, early intervention is so key in this whole equation. So Jennifer, as a parent, did Zach open up? This is another question from the audience. Great question from the audience. As a parent, did Zach open up to you about what helped him most from you, or what annoyed him? We're always trying to help our kids, but often don't know what to do. Great question.
That is a great question. What helped him most, it was an 8-year period, so obviously things changed. They weren't always the same. In the beginning, when he had a psychologist at Oshai Children's Hospital's clinic, he helped him greatly. He did not like to share all of the things that they talked about because he was a minor. I was actually invited to come in at the end of sessions and go over things. But then it became where he just became more and more private. Obviously, some embarrassment and shame to some of his obsessions and compulsions. So he didn't like too much interference, and he also wasn't a child. He was 17 when he started treatment, and then he was an adult all through his 20s. So it was a tough line to walk, because especially when he struggled with depression and didn't want to leave the house. I always encouraged him to get up, maybe go for a walk, maybe take a shower, maybe go down and sit with his brothers. Sometimes that was helpful. I just kind of over the years got to know like what was just annoying to him. And the same with treatment. I mean, I know of a lot of patients who sometimes don't want to get treatment. They don't want to see their psychologist or their counselor. Fortunately, Zach was rarely ever like that. He was always willing to go for treatment. But if there were times he didn't, I would obviously try to encourage him, drive him, take part in any way. But I know you just have to, as a parent, kind of sometimes fall back, especially an adult. It's different with a child. I think you can maybe stay on top of it more.
Thank you. That's really great advice, because I think a lot of parents, like was said in the question, don't know what to do and need to be educated. So hopefully your response can help those who might have that same question. Auggi, what advice would you give to teachers or employers who encounter OCD? How can they be supportive? Another question from our audience.
So when we talk about like teachers and maybe talk a little bit more about like working with children, having families participate in treatment under obviously the supervision of a counselor who would be directing that is actually really effective, because sometimes people with OCD can involve the people around them in their compulsion. So maybe reassurance seeking, where I'm asking like this question over and over again because it only makes me feel calm when I hear you say it, but then it's for shorter and shorter periods of time. So I think that if like a teacher has a kid with OCD and they know that this child's in treatment, they could have conversations with the parents maybe about ways that they could support the kid in the classroom. But that would obviously have to be under the direction of like a counselor. I think also like if you notice those kind of repertoires, maybe bringing those things up to a parent, because maybe the parent's not seeing it because that obsession maybe is something that's not present at home. So they're not seeing the behavior as much at home. And I think in general, then when we talk about like supporting kind of like all individuals of all ages, sometimes it can be like serving as like a collateral to someone, like a partner whose partner is going to mental health counseling, could have a meeting with their counselor and talk about the things that they can do to help them like remember to like take a breath or use their exposure script or practice any of those skills before maybe engaging with the compulsion, or maybe like have a set rule about the number of workable reassurances that that they can remind them of. But I also think that just like being able to understand and willing to listen about those things, because a lot of OCD does have like the shame that gets attached to it, and so that shame can really trap us inside ourselves. And so when our loved ones or the people in our lives learn about it and understand, then we're able to communicate and not feel isolated in it as well.
Thank you. Thank you. So another question for you, Jennifer, from the audience. Even though through his struggles and suffering, Zach seemed to want to help others, and you said that before. What do you think drove that kind of compassion in him?
I just think he was born with that. Some people are, just highly compassionate and empathetic. He was at UB and, wanted to become a counselor and help people. We didn't find out until after he died how many people he had actually helped. I'm going to get very emotional, but, at his wake, people we didn't even know showing up saying he saved their life. So a lot of times he was locked in his bedroom those last couple of years, and I thought he was kind of on social media, he was on his phone. But it turns out a lot of that time he was conversing on the phone and in text and messaging with friends, and he helped them, so it's just who he was, that's why our family tries to continue that.
And I'm sure you exemplified that in the book about him, You Wonderful Boy. I'm sure you shared that. That's incredible. So another question for you, Auggi, from the audience. And this is something that I hadn't even really thought of, but is it common for the elderly to experience OCD? And I think maybe the better way to put that is it possible for it to develop when we're older?
I mean, these kind of repertoires can really develop throughout life. And also like people with OCD, they go through themes, and they also may have periods where it's more and less like prevalent within their life. It can develop in response to like with ADHD, sometimes you'll see repertoires that might develop in response to like trying to remember things, which could be very common with elderly populations too. And it can also develop these kind of OCD repertoires in response to like trying to prevent like traumatic events, like in response to traumas. And so really we can see it develop across the ages. It's just with childhood OCD, when we're able to treat things early, sometimes we're able to instill skills which can keep people from building up those repertoires as much, so that you have less debilitation, or even sometimes no repertoires at all, really, that would be unworkable in adulthood.
Thank you. Jennifer, what would you say to any parents watching that have a child with OCD? Aside from what you've already shared, and I know you shared a lot already, is there anything else that you may not have mentioned that you'd want them to know?
Well, just to reiterate what we've said several times, try to get treatment, as early as possible. And I would say don't don't give up on it. Keep trying every avenue you can. I think there's a lot more resources now in Western New York than there were 14 years ago. And keep trying until you find the person that helps. And also, and I think this is so important, being a mom who had a child who suffered, it's really important to take care of yourself as a mother and as a parent. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that self-care for yourself, but find that thing that gives that self-care to yourself. For me, it took me years to figure it out. And for me, it was exercise and yoga and meditation. Maybe it's getting a counselor, going to a support group, or just a friend. But it's that old theory of putting the life mask on before you can help someone else. And for a parent who has a child going through anything, even if it's a physical problem, I think it's so important to just try not to lose yourself in it and take care of yourself.
Thank you. And this just actually popped into my head while you're talking. Mental Health Advocates of West New York actually has an OCD support group that is facilitated by a wonderful gentleman named Sammy Violante. I don't know if you know Sammy, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Sammy is such an incredible resource in our community. He's done work around OCD, of course, person with lived experience for many years. So MHA is there. You can see their information referral line on the bottom third of our screen. That telephone number is there that you can call them. Also for information on where to get resources and help for OCD, but also you can find out about that support group and when it's held and how you can meet Sammy for anybody who may be interested. Also, you see there the number for Horizon Health Services, which is one of our local behavioral health agencies that is sponsoring our event. Just a few minutes left, but I also want to ask, so Auggi, I know you've talked a lot about different aspects of OCD and some of the treatments. Now, obviously, you can't share anything confidential in terms of private, identifiable information. But can you share about maybe a success story that you may have had working with someone without identifying them individually?
Yeah. So, I want this to not be identifiable.
I know it's a tough part.
And now I am overthinking it. So let me sub out some of the details. Okay. So and I think like with like OCD can shift between themes. So this focus shifts to something else, but now we maybe have the skills to deal with that better without having to go through the process again. That's what I really feel like is successful. And so I've had individuals who were so anxious about like bed bugs, for example, that it would make it hard to leave their house, right? And so that's considered like a fear of contamination, right? And it can present with also even some somatic symptoms. So like if you did leave your house, you might start to have some itching that you couldn't explain showing up on your skin. And so we did a lot of just exposure and act around this. And that's not exposure as in here's a bed bug. But for situations like that, it would be like verbal exposure, right? Because we can't actually be like, here's a bed bug. That would be not the kind of exposure that would be helpful for anyone. Right. And so with that, like it made it easier to travel. And also it made it easier to recognize when the body focus feelings would show up for other obsessions. And that helped them to kind of disconnect a little bit from those and find a little bit of space from them so that they wouldn't like hyper focus on it. Like, let's say if they noticed their heart rate, it used to be that they would continually like focus in on that until they have a panic attack. Well, now that we're connecting that some of that can be a body focus, like compulsive response to an anxious thought. Well, now I'm noticing my heart, but I'm noticing what else is here. Mindfulness is really helpful for this. What else is happening besides this? What else is happening besides this? And can I attend to those things while tolerating this long enough that maybe it can fade a little bit into static in the background?
That's really great. And I'm sure you have other success stories, but thank you for sharing that one. Okay, we only have a few minutes left, but I want to actually get this last question to you, Auggi, before we get your closing comments. This is from a clinician. She says, or they say, I should say, I often hear that someone may have a concern about an adult friend or family member, but struggle to say anything because they feel like they don't know how to approach it, what to say because they don't want to be upsetting. What related resources are available to help them feel more confident in sharing their concerns for that person?
Yeah. Just to learn more about OCD.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I feel like, gosh, off the top of my head, I want to say it's it's called like, now I want to open a tab, but I'm worried it'll affect the video.
That's
I
okay.
think it's called like NoCD. It has a lot of good resources about it. Also, like if you come into Horizon, like we have informational packets on different disorders which can help to describe it. I don't necessarily think that like that you have to know everything about OCD to be able to help someone who you feel like would be struggling with it, though. I think that really when it comes to that, like it can be approached similarly to how you would approach other things, which is like, how can I best support this person in getting them to like mental health care, for example, because that is the thing they need. And then once they have that resource, then you can be the support to help, collaborate with them in their treatment or whatnot. But really in terms of helping them get there, I think it would be the same that you would do for if you were worried about your friend's depression or anything like that. I don't want anyone to come away feeling like they have to be an expert on OCD to be able to go to a loved one. And in fact, quite the opposite. And you don't even have to necessarily say, I'm worried you have OCD, but you can reference this. You can say more that you've just noticed them struggling, notice how much time they're spending on certain things, and that there are community resources like Horizon is definitely one where they could go and talk to someone and maybe be able to get some help with that.
Thank you. And I think you're right. I think about that. I mean, it's like any other mental health or even addiction-related condition. There's a lot of resources out there, but the main thing is being willing to be open and to listen. And I think a lot of the things is that listening is a skill that I think a lot of people can benefit from in these situations, because oftentimes people just want to be heard.
Yeah.
Right? I think we can all agree about that. So I know if you're willing to be a listener and to admit that you don't know the answer, but there are people who can help. And we do have, and you're right, you said it so appropriately, Jennifer. We have a lot more resources today than we did, 5, 10, 15 years ago about this, about OCD and other conditions that there's a lot of help in this area in West New York. So thank you for that. All right, you each get about a minute or so to wrap up. Any last comments or closing statements that you'd like to make? So Jennifer, you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm just so grateful to be a part of this discussion. Thank you for having me. I always say that Zach died of an overdose, but it was an addiction that killed him. It was his debilitating OCD that he could never get away from, that he never really got relief from. It really brings healing and helps me and our family when we get to continue to talk about Zach and share his story. If we can help one single person anywhere to maybe, discover that they have OCD, or that, someone they know does, or just to have people more aware of what it really is. That's just so important to us. And if there's anyone out there who is struggling and suffering and with their mental health in any way, I just like to say, please don't give up hope. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you for that. And don't forget, the foundation is liberatore.com. You can find out more information. Thank you for that, Mike. And Auggi, how about you?
All right. I appreciate Jennifer sharing her son's story with us and just the opportunity to come and speak today. I think that these kind of conversations really, like, the goal of them is to help reach as many people as possible and empower as many people as possible to help the people in their lives, to help themselves, and to find the resources to help manage or better understand what's going on for them. And so I hope that this served that purpose. I'm very grateful that this organization exists and very thankful to be here. And I'd like to encourage anyone who relates to anything said here, or like the question asked, anyone who, even has like a loved one who they feel like they can see maybe a better understanding of based on this conversation. Encourage them to talk and listen, and also to know that there are, again, a lot more resources. And Horizon definitely is an organization that has the ability to assess and connect you with counselors that have like specialties in working with those kind of individuals. And you know, I think that that's something that is hopefully only going to continue to expand within the community as the stigma decreases and understanding increases. So
Thank you for that, Auggi. So as a reminder to our audience, we need you to take the pledge and stigma by going to our website at letstalkstigma.org. Reminder, if you're an organization and would like to join our cause, there's more information on the website as well. Just click on the members tab to find out how. And it takes all of us to do this, but together we can make this happen. Once again, I'd like to thank our panelists, Jennifer Liberatore and Auggi May. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Horizon Health Services. I also want to thank the folks behind the scenes, Mike Telesco from Telesco Creative Group for his behind the scenes technical support, Matt Smith, chair of the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition Outreach Committee, and Karen Karaszewski from KKPR Buffalo for their support as well. Join us on Thursday, February 26th at noon here on our Facebook page. We'll be discussing the state of stigma, how stigma impacts blue-collar workers. And so until then, be well and be safe. Thank you.